In a distant corner of the galaxy, far from Earth and its bustling cities, there was a small outpost floating silently in space. This outpost wasn't fancy or grand. It looked more like a metal box with antennas sticking out of it. But it served an important purpose. It was a meeting point for soldiers, scientists, and anyone else brave enough to work on the edge of known space. The air inside was stale, recycled countless times, but no one complained. Complaining didn't change anything out here. One day, something unusual happened. A sleek alien spacecraft approached the outpost. It wasn't large, but its design was strange. Smooth curves and glowing lines that pulsed faintly as if alive. The humans stationed at the outpost gathered near the docking bay, curious about who, or what, was coming to visit them. Among them were John Carter, a tall man with broad shoulders and a serious expression; Rachel Meyer, a sharp-eyed woman who always seemed ready for action; and Daniel Brooks, the youngest of the group, whose excitement often got the better of him. When the ship finally landed, the hatch opened slowly, revealing a towering figure. His name was Zixik, though none of them knew that yet. He stepped out, his body covered in dark, armored plates that shifted slightly as he moved. His eyes glowed faintly, casting an eerie light over the room. He didn't look friendly, but he didn't look hostile either. Instead, he seemed ancient, like someone who had seen too much and carried the weight of it all. The humans stared at him, unsure of what to say. Finally, John cleared his throat and spoke up. "Welcome to Outpost Delta," he said, trying to sound confident. "We weren't expecting visitors." Zixk tilted his head slightly, studying them. His voice came out deep and raspy, like gravel being crushed underfoot. "I requested permission to dock," he replied simply. "You approved it." Rachel crossed her arms, narrowing her eyes. "Yeah, but we didn't know you were. Well, you." Zixk didn't respond right away. Instead, he took another step forward, his movements deliberate and calculated. The humans instinctively took a step back, except for Daniel, who stood frozen in place, wide-eyed. "Do not fear me," Zixk said after a moment. "I am not here to harm you. I am here to speak." "Speak," Daniel blurted out before he could stop himself. "About what?" Zixk's glowing eyes locked onto Daniel, making him regret speaking at all. "About humanity," the alien said slowly. "About your battles, your victories, and your failures." The room fell silent. No one knew how to respond to that. What did this alien want with their stories? Why would he care about human wars? Eventually, John broke the silence. "All right then. Let's hear it. What do you want to tell us?" Zixk studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "Very well. Gather your people. There is much to discuss." As the humans began to shuffle toward the mess hall, whispers spread among them. Who was this alien? Why had he come all the way out here just to talk? And most importantly, what kind of stories was he going to share? None of them had answers yet, but they couldn't deny the unease growing in their stomachs. Something told them that whatever Zixk had to say, it wouldn't be easy to hear. Once everyone was seated, Zixk stood at the front of the room, his towering form casting long shadows across the walls. He looked around at the faces staring back at him, some curious, others wary. Then, without any further delay, he began to speak. "I have fought alongside humans," he said, his voice low and steady. "And I have seen things that even your strongest warriors would struggle to endure. Tonight, I will share those stories with you." The room grew quieter still, the only sound the faint hum of the outpost machinery. Whatever Zixk was about to say, it was clear that it would leave a lasting impression. As Zixik stood at the front of the mess hall, his glowing eyes scanned the room. The humans sat quietly, some leaning forward with interest, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. John Carter rested his elbows on the table, his face serious as he studied the alien. Rachel Meyer tapped her fingers lightly against her cup, her sharp gaze never leaving Zixik. Daniel Brooks, still wide-eyed, looked like he might jump out of his seat at any moment. Zix began to speak again, his deep voice filling the silence. "I have been part of many battles," he said slowly. "Some were fought for honor, others for survival. But none were as unique as the ones I shared with humans." He paused, letting his words sink in. The soldiers exchanged glances, unsure what to make of his statement. What did he mean by unique? Was it a compliment or something else? "I first joined forces with your kind during a time you call the Coalition Wars," Zix continued. "It was a period when humanity faced enemies far greater than yourselves. Yet, despite the odds, you did not falter. You adapted. You endured." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound like we won every battle," she said skeptically. "But we didn't. We lost plenty of times." Zix nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, you lost. But even in defeat, you showed a determination that surprised many. You do not give up easily, even when all hope seems gone." John leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Okay, so you're saying we're stubborn. Is that supposed to be a good thing?" "It is both a strength and a flaw," Zix replied. "Your stubbornness has saved you more times than you realize. But it has also led to darker paths." The room grew quieter. No one spoke, but the tension in the air thickened. Zix's words carried a weight that made everyone uneasy. What exactly had he seen during those battles? And why did it feel like he was holding something back? "I came here tonight because I believe you must understand yourselves better." Zix's voice filled the mess hall as he began his first story. "The Siege of New Chicago," he said, his tone calm but heavy. "It was one of the earliest battles I fought alongside humans. A city under attack, its people desperate to survive." The soldiers leaned forward slightly, their curiosity outweighing their unease. John frowned, trying to remember if he'd ever heard of this battle before. Rachel kept her arms crossed, her sharp eyes fixed on the alien. Daniel, meanwhile, looked like he was holding his breath. "The enemy was unlike anything you had faced before," Zix continued. "They were biomechanical creatures, part machine, part living tissue. Fast, relentless, and hungry. They consumed everything in their path. Buildings, resources, even people." A shiver ran through the room. No one spoke, but the image Zix painted was vivid enough to make their skin crawl. "At first, your forces tried to fight them with conventional weapons," Zix said. "But bullets did little against their armored bodies. Explosives only slowed them down. The situation grew dire quickly." Rachel shifted in her seat. "So what happened?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Zix turned his glowing eyes toward her. "Humans adapted. You always do. When your weapons failed, you turned to the environment. The streets of New Chicago became your battlefield, and you used whatever you could find." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then he went on. "Captain Emily Dawson led a group of soldiers into the industrial district. There, they found tanks of fuel and chemicals. Using tools scavenged from nearby factories, they built makeshift flamethrowers. It was crude, dangerous work, but it gave them a chance." John rubbed his chin, imagining the scene. "Flamethrowers, ha. That must have been brutal." "It was," Zix replied. "The flames tore through the enemy ranks, melting their mechanical parts and burning their flesh. But it came at a cost. Entire city blocks were consumed by fire. Civilians trapped in the chaos. They did not survive." The room fell silent. Daniel swallowed hard, his earlier excitement replaced by a growing sense of dread. He glanced around at the others, wondering if they felt the same way he did, uneasy, almost sick. Rachel broke the silence. "You're saying we destroyed our own city just to stop them?" Zix nodded. "Yes, and that decision haunted Captain Dawson for the rest of her life. She once told me that victory felt hollow when it came at such a price." John shook his head. "I don't get it. Why tell us this? Are you trying to make us feel guilty or something?" No, Zix said firmly. I am showing you the truth. War is not clean or simple. It forces you to make choices no one should have to face. In New Chicago, humanity chose survival over everything else. That choice saved countless lives, but it also left scars that will never heal. Daniel finally spoke up, his voice quieter than before. Did we win in the end? Zix hesitated, as if weighing his answer. The siege ended. The enemy retreated, unable to withstand the flames. But New Chicago was gone. What remained was ash and rubble, a reminder of what had been sacrificed. The soldiers sat in stunned silence, absorbing the story. None of them had lived through that battle, but they could feel its weight pressing down on them. It was one thing to hear about war in history books. It was another to listen to someone who had witnessed it firsthand. After a long pause, Zix spoke again. This is only the beginning, he said. There are more stories to tell, more lessons to learn. His words sent a chill through the room. Whatever stories came next, the soldiers knew they wouldn't be easy to hear. But deep down, they also knew they couldn't look away. Not now. Zix paused for a moment, his glowing eyes scanning the faces of the soldiers. They were quieter now, their earlier curiosity replaced by a mix of unease and dread. He could see it in their expressions, the way John's jaw was clenched, the way Rachel's arms remained tightly crossed, and how Daniel seemed to shrink into his seat. But Zix didn't stop. He had more to share. The next story takes place on Europa, he began, his deep voice steady. A moon covered in ice, far from Earth. It was there that I fought alongside Lieutenant Alex Hart and her team. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Europa? What were we doing out there? Zix tilted his head slightly. Searching for resources. Humanity had spread across the stars, but survival always requires more. Your people discovered valuable minerals beneath the ice. Unfortunately, so did others. Others? John asked, leaning forward. Who? Aliens, Zix replied simply. Not like me. These were predators, creatures that saw your presence as a threat. They attacked without warning, using weapons you couldn't match. Lieutenant Hart's squad was sent to hold them off while engineers worked to extract the minerals. Daniel frowned. How did they fight back if they were outnumbered and outgunned? Zix's lips curled faintly, almost like a smile. Ingenuity, he said. That is something humans excel at. When faced with impossible odds, you find ways to turn the tide. On Europa, the key was the environment itself. He paused, letting the anticipation build. The soldiers leaned closer, drawn into the story despite their discomfort. The aliens relied on advanced technology, but they underestimated the power of simplicity. Zix continued. Lieutenant Hart ordered her team to carve weapons from the ice itself. Spears, blades, even shields. The cold made them brittle, but they were sharp enough to pierce the aliens' armor. John blinked. You're saying they fought an alien army with ice spears? Yes, Zix said. And it worked. For a time. The aliens were caught off guard by such primitive tactics. They expected lasers and missiles, not jagged shards of frozen water. Hart led a daring ambush, striking quickly and retreating before the enemy could regroup. Rachel shook her head, amazed but troubled. That sounds brutal. Did anyone survive? Some did, Zix replied. But not all. Hart lost half her team during the final assault. She herself was injured, bleeding from multiple wounds. Yet she refused to fall back. Instead, she stood her ground, holding off the enemy long enough for the engineers to finish their work. Daniel swallowed hard. What happened to her? She died, Zix said bluntly. Her body was found surrounded by fallen enemies, her ice spear still clutched in her hand. The engineers escaped with the minerals, thanks to her sacrifice. The room grew quiet again. No one spoke, but the weight of Zix's words hung heavily in the air. Even John, who usually tried to keep things light, looked somber. Rachel stared down at her hands, her mind replaying the image of a lone soldier standing against overwhelming odds. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Why does it always have to be like this?" he asked softly. "Why does it always end with someone dying?" Zix turned his gaze toward him. "Because war demands sacrifice," he said. "It strips away everything except what truly matters: survival, loyalty, and sometimes revenge." Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples. "I get that, but hearing about it makes me wonder, are we really any better than the enemies we fight?" Zix didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her for a moment, as if weighing his response. "That is a question only you can answer," he said finally. "But remember this: humanity's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. You adapt, you overcome, but in doing so, you often lose sight of who you are." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. None of them liked what they were hearing, but they couldn't deny the truth in Zix's words. War wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about choices, sacrifices, and consequences. After a long pause, Zix spoke again. "There are more stories to tell," he said. "Each one carries its own lessons. Are you ready to hear them?" The soldiers hesitated, but eventually they nodded. They knew they couldn't turn away now. Whatever horrors awaited them in Zix's next tale, they would face them together. Zix's voice filled the room once more, low and steady. "The next story takes place on Mars," he said, his glowing eyes locking onto the soldiers. "It is a tale of betrayal, a wound that still festers in the memory of those who lived through it." The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Betrayal wasn't something they expected to hear about in a war story. John leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Rachel's arms remained crossed, her expression hardening. Daniel sat quietly, his earlier excitement completely gone. "Commander Lucas Ford was one of humanity's finest leaders," Zix began. "He commanded a large colony on Mars, tasked with mining resources and expanding Earth's reach. For years, everything seemed to be going well. The colony thrived, and morale was high. But then," Zix continued, "something changed. Supplies began running low. Equipment failed without explanation. Accidents became frequent. At first, no one suspected foul play. They blamed the harsh conditions of Mars, the isolation, the constant struggle to survive." Rachel frowned. "What happened?" Zix paused, as if choosing his words carefully. Ford uncovered the truth. It wasn't accidents or bad luck causing the problems. It was sabotage. Someone within the colony had been working against them, secretly feeding information to a rival corporation. Their goal was simple: destroy the colony and claim its resources for themselves. John let out a low whistle. "That's cold." "What did Ford do?" "At first, he tried to handle it quietly," Zix replied. "He gathered evidence, questioned his team, and searched for the traitor. But time was running out. The colony was falling apart, and trust among the crew was eroding. When Ford realized how deep the betrayal went, he made a decision that shocked everyone." Daniel glanced up nervously. "What decision?" "He executed the traitors," Zix said bluntly. "Publicly, in front of the entire colony. He wanted there to be no doubt about what would happen to anyone who betrayed their people." The room fell silent. Even John, who usually kept his emotions in check, looked disturbed. Rachel stared at the table, her fingers tapping lightly against her cup. Daniel swallowed hard, his hands gripping the edge of his seat. "Was that necessary?" Rachel asked after a moment, her voice quieter than usual. Zix tilted his head slightly. "Necessary? Perhaps not. But effective? Yes." After the executions, the sabotage stopped, the colony stabilized, and Ford led a final stand against the rival corporation when they arrived to take over. His actions saved countless lives, but they also left scars that never healed. John rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "So Ford became some kind of hero, right? He saved the colony." Zix shook his head. No, he became a symbol of fear. The colonists respected him, but they also feared him. Many questioned whether he had gone too far. And Ford himself, he never forgave himself for what he had done. Daniel hesitated before speaking. Did he survive? No, Zix replied. After the battle, Ford disappeared. Some say he wandered into the Martian desert, unable to live with the guilt. Others believe he stayed behind to protect the colony until his last breath. Either way, his story ended in tragedy. The soldiers sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The image of Commander Ford making such a difficult choice, and paying the price for it, was haunting. It wasn't just a story about betrayal. It was a story about the cost of leadership, the burden of responsibility, and the line between justice and vengeance. Finally, Rachel spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Why are you telling us this? Are you trying to warn us about something? Zix studied her for a moment before answering. I am showing you the choices you may one day face. War forces you to make decisions that will shape not only your fate but the fate of those around you. Some choices will save lives. Others will haunt you forever. His word hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, knowing they couldn't turn away now. Whatever stories Zix had left to tell, they would listen, not because they wanted to, but because they needed to understand the full weight of what it meant to fight. And so, Zix prepared to continue, his next story waiting to unfold. Zix paused, his glowing eyes scanning the room. The soldiers sat quietly, their earlier curiosity now replaced by a growing sense of dread. He could see it in their faces, the way John's shoulders were tense, the way Rachel's fingers drummed nervously against her cup, and how Daniel seemed to shrink further into his seat with every story. The next tale takes place beneath the sulfuric clouds of Venus. Zix began, his deep voice steady. It is a story of survival, courage, and unimaginable horror. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Venus was known for its deadly environment, scorching temperatures, crushing pressure, and toxic air. None of them could imagine what kind of battle might unfold there. Sergeant Mia Torres led a small team on a mission to disable an alien weapon hidden deep below the surface. Zix continued. The weapon was unlike anything your scientists had ever seen. If activated, it would have devastated Earth's colonies in the system. Stopping it was not optional. It was essential. Rachel leaned forward slightly. How did they even get down there? Venus isn't exactly friendly. They used specialized suits and vehicles designed to withstand the conditions, Zix replied. But technology can only do so much. Once they descended into the tunnels beneath the planet's surface, they were cut off from reinforcements. They were alone. John frowned. So what happened? At first, everything went according to plan, Zix said. The team located the weapon and began disabling it. But then, something unexpected occurred. The tunnels were not empty. Daniel's eyes widened. What do you mean, not empty? There were creatures, Zix explained. Parasitic beings that thrived in the darkness. They were small at first, almost insect-like. But once they attached themselves to a host, they grew rapidly, consuming the body and taking control of its mind. A shiver ran through the room. Even John, who usually tried to stay calm, looked unsettled. You're saying these things took over people? Yes, Zix replied. One by one, members of the team began to fall. Their own comrades turned against them, their minds no longer their own. Panic spread quickly. Rachel shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. That sounds like a nightmare. It was, Zix agreed. Torres knew they couldn't fight both the creatures and the infected soldiers. She made a choice. She ordered her remaining team to retreat while she stayed behind to finish the job. Daniel swallowed hard. She sacrificed herself. Zix nodded. Yes, she rigged explosives around the weapon, knowing it would destroy both it and the creatures. As the others fled, she stayed behind, buying them time. When the explosives detonated, The weapon, and everything nearby, was obliterated. The room fell silent. The soldiers stared at the table, each lost in their own thoughts. The image of Sergeant Torres standing alone in the dark, surrounded by monsters, was haunting. It wasn't just bravery, it was selflessness. But it also left a bitter taste in their mouths. John finally broke the silence. Did the rest of the team make it out? Yes, Zix replied. But they were never the same. They carried the memory of what they had seen, and what they had lost, for the rest of their lives. Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples. Why does it always come down to sacrifice? Why does it always end with someone giving everything? Zix studied her for a moment before answering. Because war demands it. Survival often requires paying a price. Sometimes that price is too high. Other times, it is worth it. His words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. The soldiers exchanged glances, none of them able to speak. They knew Zix wasn't done yet. There were more stories waiting to be told, more lessons to learn. And though they dreaded hearing them, they also knew they couldn't turn away now. As Zix prepared to continue, his next tale looming on the horizon, the soldiers braced themselves. Whatever horrors awaited them, they would face them together. But they couldn't shake the feeling that these stories would change them forever. Zix's voice filled the room again, steady and unrelenting. The next story takes place on Earth's moon, he said, his glowing eyes fixed on the soldiers. It is a tale of sacrifice, a moment when humanity faced its darkest hour. The soldiers shifted in their seats, uneasy but unable to look away. John's jaw was tight, Rachel's arms remained crossed, and Daniel sat hunched over, clutching his knees as if trying to make himself smaller. The lunar base Alpha was one of Earth's most important outposts, Zix began. It housed scientists, engineers, and soldiers, all working together to expand humanity's reach into space. But it also held secrets, classified projects that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Rachel frowned. What kind of secrets? Weapons, Zix replied. Advanced technology designed to give humanity an edge in future wars. The problem was, the enemy knew about them too. John leaned forward, his expression hardening. Who was the enemy this time? A coalition of alien races, Zix explained. They wanted the technology for themselves. When negotiations failed, they launched an attack. The base was outnumbered and outgunned from the start. Daniel's voice trembled as he asked, "What happened?" At first, the defenders fought bravely, Zix said. They used every weapon and tactic they had, but the enemy kept coming. Reinforcements were days away, and supplies were running low. It was only a matter of time before the base fell. Rachel shook her head. So what did they do? Just surrender? No, Zix replied firmly. General Ryan Cole made a decision that would echo through history. He ordered the destruction of the entire base. The room went silent. Even John, who usually tried to stay composed, looked shocked. He destroyed his own base, Daniel stammered, with everyone still inside. Zix nodded. Not everyone. Cole gave the surviving civilians and non-essential personnel a chance to escape, but the rest stayed behind to ensure the mission was completed. They rigged the base with explosives, setting them to detonate once the enemy breached the perimeter. John rubbed his temples, trying to process what he was hearing. That's insane. How could anyone make that call? It wasn't easy, Zix admitted. Cole knew the consequences. He knew he was condemning himself and his soldiers to death. But he also knew that if the enemy got their hands on the technology, the cost would be far greater. Rachel's voice was quiet but sharp. Did it work? Did they stop the enemy? Yes, Zix said. When the base exploded, it wiped out the invaders and destroyed the weapons. The enemy retreated, knowing they had lost their chance. Humanity survived, but at a terrible price. Daniel swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. What about Cole? What happened to him? He stayed until the end, Zix replied. I saw him myself. After giving the order, he stood alone on the surface of the moon, watching as the enemy closed in. He didn't try to run or hide. He simply waited, staring at Earth as the explosives detonated around him. The room felt heavier than ever. The soldiers sat in stunned silence, the weight of the story pressing down on them. The image of General Cole standing alone on the moon, choosing death over surrender, was both inspiring and unbearable. Finally, Rachel spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. "Why are you telling us these stories? Are you trying to break us or something?" Zixk tilted his head, studying her carefully. "No, I am showing you the truth. War forces you to make impossible choices. Sometimes those choices save lives. Other times, they destroy them. But each one leaves a mark, on you, on your people, on history." John sighed, shaking his head. "I don't know if I'd have the guts to do what Cole did, to make that kind of call." "Perhaps not," Zixk said. "But that is why you must learn from those who have. Their sacrifices teach us what it means to fight, not just with weapons, but with willpower, resolve, and courage." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, none of them able to speak. They knew there were more stories waiting, more lessons to endure. And though they dreaded hearing them, they couldn't turn away now. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But they couldn't shake the feeling that these tales would change them forever. As Zixk prepared to continue, his next story looming closer, the soldiers braced themselves. Whatever horrors awaited them, they would listen, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Zixk's voice grew quieter, but it carried a weight that made every word impossible to ignore. "The next stories are not about victories," he said, his glowing eyes scanning the room. "They are about humanity's darkest moments, times when survival came at a cost no one should have to pay." The soldiers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. John's hands clenched into fists. Rachel's sharp gaze faltered for the first time, and Daniel looked like he might bolt from the room if he could. "During my time with humans," Zixk began, "I witnessed acts that were unspeakable. Desperation drove your species to do things that even now make me question the nature of war." Rachel frowned, her voice cutting through the tension. "What kind of things?" Zixk hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "On one exoplanet, I saw biological weapons deployed, not against enemy soldiers, but against civilians. Entire villages wiped out to deny resources to the opposition. Men, women, children, none were spared." Daniel's face went pale. We wouldn't do that. Would we?" "You did," Zixk replied bluntly. "And you justified it as necessary. But the scars remain, not just on the land, but on those who gave the orders and carried them out." John leaned forward, his voice tight. "That's insane. Who would ever think that was okay?" "People who believe they have no other choice," Zixk said. "But it doesn't end there. On another world, I saw entire colonies abandoned, left to die because evacuating them would have risked larger populations. The survivors called it collateral damage. To me, it looked like betrayal." Rachel shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could anyone live with themselves after that?" "Some couldn't," Zixk admitted. "Commanders resigned. Soldiers deserted. Others turned to drink or worse. But others convinced themselves it was worth it, that the lives lost were a small price for the greater good." Daniel swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "You're saying we killed our own people, just to win?" "It happens more often than you'd like to admit," Zixk said. "War twists morality until it becomes unrecognizable. It forces you to weigh one life against another. And sometimes, humanity chooses wrong." John ran a hand over his face, trying to process what he was hearing. "Okay, but not everyone's like that. Most of us try to do the right thing." "Yes," Zixk agreed. "But even the best of you can be pushed too far. Let me tell you about a stranded unit I encountered once. They had been cut off behind enemy lines, supplies running low, no hope of rescue. When food ran out, They turned to desperate measures. Rachel's eyes widened. What kind of desperate measures? Six's voice dropped lower, almost a growl. Cannibalism. The weak fed the strong so the mission could continue. By the time reinforcements arrived, only a handful remained. They survived. But they were never the same. The room fell silent, the air thick with unease. No one moved. No one spoke. The soldiers stared at the table, each lost in their own thoughts. The idea of turning on one another, of doing something so monstrous, was unthinkable. And yet, Zix's words painted a picture too vivid to dismiss. Finally, Rachel broke the silence, her voice shaking. Why are you telling us this? Are you trying to make us hate ourselves? No, Zix replied. I am showing you the truth. Humanity is capable of greatness, but also of horror. You must understand both sides if you wish to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. John sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't know if I can handle much more of this. You must, Zix said firmly, because these lessons will prepare you for the battles ahead. War is not just about fighting. It's about choosing who you want to be when everything falls apart. As Zix prepared to continue, the soldiers braced themselves. Whatever stories came next, they knew they couldn't turn away. These tales weren't just warnings. They were mirrors, forcing them to confront the worst and best of what it meant to be human. And though it terrified them, they listened, knowing they had no other choice. The room was heavy with silence as Zix paused, his glowing eyes resting on each soldier in turn. John stared at the floor, his jaw clenched tightly. Rachel's arms remained crossed, but her usual sharpness had softened into something closer to exhaustion. Daniel sat hunched over, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. Why are you doing this? Rachel finally asked, her voice quieter than before. Why tell us all of this? Are you trying to scare us? Break us? Zix tilted his head, studying her for a moment. No, he said simply. I am trying to prepare you. Prepare us for what? John demanded, his frustration breaking through. For some kind of war we haven't even seen yet. For choices we don't want to make. Yes, Zix replied without hesitation. You think you understand war because you've trained for it, fought in it, survived it. But there is a difference between knowing how to fight and truly understanding the cost of fighting. Daniel looked up, his voice barely audible. But why do we need to hear about all the bad things? The terrible choices. Why can't we just focus on winning? Because winning isn't enough, Zix said firmly. Victory means nothing if you lose yourself in the process, if you forget who you are, or worse, if you become something you hate. Rachel frowned, leaning forward slightly. So what are you saying? That we're supposed to learn from these stories and somehow avoid making the same mistakes? I am saying you must decide what kind of soldiers and what kind of people you want to be. Zix replied. War will test you. It will push you to your limits and beyond. And when that happens, you will have to choose. Will you cling to your humanity, or will you let it slip away? John shook his head, running a hand over his face. It's not that simple. You act like there's always a clear right answer, but there isn't. Sometimes you don't get a choice. That is true, Zix admitted. Sometimes the only options are bad ones, but even then, you must ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be when the dust settles? When the battle is over and the dead are buried, will I be able to look at myself in the mirror? The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. None of them had an answer. How could they? These weren't questions they had ever been trained to face. They had learned how to aim a weapon, how to follow orders, how to survive, but no one had taught them how to live with the weight of their decisions. Daniel hesitated before speaking, his voice trembling. Do you think we're strong enough to handle all this, I mean? Zix studied him for a long moment before answering. I do not know, he said honestly, but strength is not something you are born with. It is something you earn through pain, through loss, through facing the hardest parts of yourself and refusing to give up. Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples. And if we fail, if we make the wrong choices, then you learn, Zix said. You pick yourself up and try again. That is what humanity does best. You fall, but you never stay down for long. The room fell silent once more, the weight of Zix's words settling over them like a heavy blanket. The soldiers sat quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. They couldn't deny the truth in what he was saying, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. Finally, John spoke up, his voice low and steady. All right, we'll listen. Whatever else you have to say, we'll hear it. But after this, we're going to need some time to figure out what it all means. Zix nodded slowly. That is fair. But remember this. The lessons I share tonight are not meant to break you. They are meant to strengthen you, to remind you of who you are and what you stand for. Do not waste them. With that, Zix straightened slightly, preparing to continue. The soldiers braced themselves, knowing the final story would be the hardest to hear, but they also knew they couldn't turn away. Not now. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Zix stood silently for a moment, his glowing eyes scanning the room one last time. The soldiers sat still, their faces etched with exhaustion and unease. John's hands rested heavily on the table. Rachel's arms were no longer crossed, but lay limply in her lap, and Daniel seemed to shrink further into himself, as if trying to disappear. This is my final story, Zix said, his voice low and steady. It is not about battles or victories. It is about survival, and what comes after. The soldiers exchanged glances, unsure what to expect. They had heard tales of sacrifice, betrayal, and horror. What more could there be? After the siege of New Chicago, I stayed with Captain Emily Dawson's unit for a short time, Zix began. They had survived the flames, but they were broken. Their bodies were scared, their minds haunted by what they had done. They called themselves the Ash Squad because they felt like nothing more than remnants of a city consumed by fire. Rachel frowned. What happened to them? They kept fighting, Zix replied. But it wasn't easy. Every battle reminded them of what they had lost. Every order forced them to confront who they had become. Some turned to anger, lashing out at anyone who questioned their actions. Others fell silent, carrying their guilt like a weight too heavy to bear. Daniel hesitated before asking, Did any of them make it through? Like really make it through? Zix nodded slowly. A few did, not because they forgot what they had done, but because they learned to live with it. They found ways to honor the dead, to remind themselves of why they fought. For some, it was helping rebuild destroyed cities. For others, it was mentoring new recruits, teaching them how to survive without losing themselves. John leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter than before. And the ones who didn't make it, what happened to them? They broke, Zix said simply. Some walked away from the fight altogether, unable to face another battlefield. Others couldn't escape the memories. They chose to end their pain in whatever way they could. The room grew heavier, the air thick with unspoken emotions. No one spoke, but each soldier felt the weight of Zix's words pressing down on them. These weren't just stories. They were warnings, reflections of the paths that lay ahead. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. So, what's the point of all this? Of telling us these stories? Zix tilted his head slightly, studying her carefully. The point is this. War does not end when the fighting stops. Its scars remain, with you, with those around you, with the worlds you protect. You must decide how to carry those scars. Will they weigh you down, or will they shape you into something stronger? John sighed, rubbing his temples. That's easier said than done. Yes, Zix agreed. But it is possible. Humanity has always found a way to endure, even when it seems impossible. That resilience is your greatest strength. Daniel looked up, his voice trembling but sincere. Do you think we can do it? Survive, I mean, not just physically, but mentally. I believe you can, Zix said firmly. but only if you remember what truly matters. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it. Strength is not refusing to break. It is finding the will to rebuild. And humanity is not perfection. It is the struggle to be better, even when the odds are against you. The soldiers sat quietly, absorbing his words. None of them felt ready. Not completely. But they knew they never would be. War didn't wait for anyone to feel prepared. After a long pause, Zix stepped back, his towering form casting long shadows across the walls. I have told you what I came to say. Now it is your turn to decide what to do with it. With that, he turned and began walking toward the door. The soldiers watched him go, none of them speaking until the sound of his footsteps faded away. For hours afterward, the room remained quiet. No one moved, no one laughed, no one joked. Each soldier sat alone with their thoughts, grappling with the lessons they had learned and the choices that awaited them. When morning came, the outpost buzzed with activity once more. But the soldiers carried something new with them, a deeper understanding of the cost of war, and a determination to face it together, no matter what came next.